Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. You might recall that back in April I did a video on two operational railways in London that were once tipped to become heritage railways, which never came to be. Recently, I travelled on the Spa Valley Railway and had a proper feel of a heritage railway that I hadn't felt in a long time. This inspired me to make a follow-up to the first video, where I'll discuss a further two heritage railways in London that were never meant to be. If you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video, as it massively helps me out when you do. And just as a disclaimer before I start, if there are any more railways in London that were once eyed up to become heritage railways that weren't ever followed through on, then leave a comment down below. So let's get into it. As we established in the first video, heritage railways are often formerly run commercial railways that were shut to passengers and revived by volunteers or non-profit organisations. In the UK, more and more heritage railways were opened following the reshaping of British Railways, a report by Beeching which earmarked the closure of 2,363 stations and 5,000 miles of track. When compared to other parts of the country, London fared far better when it came to the closure of the railways by Dr. Beeching, so these suggestions for conversion weren't due to a potential closure as part of the reshaping of British Railways, and were rather looked at in the following years instead. So what's the first railway that we'll be discussing then? We'll start off with the Brentford Branch Line, a seldom used freight-only line from Southall to an aggregates terminal to the north of Brentford. It has a rather bucolic nature about it nowadays, but it was a different story if we go back about 100 years. In the mid-19th century there were growing demands for freight travel by train as part of the Industrial Revolution. The Great Western Railway had intentions of opening a railway orientated around freight towards Brentford, given its strategic location towards the end of the Grand Junction Canal, a canal that was built to ensure the efficient transportation of goods manufactured in the North and Midlands to the capital. Despite rampant opposition from those who owned the canal, the Great Western and Brentford Railway Company was incorporated by the government in August of 1855, with construction of the railway commencing in 1856. After a few years of grafting, the railway opened on the 15th of July 1859 for freight, coinciding with the opening of the Brentford dock. There were aspirations for passenger services to begin a few weeks after freight traffic commenced, but an unfinished station at Brentford meant it wasn't until May 1860 that the line opened for passenger traffic. Platforms were constructed at Southall, with a station named Brentford opening just off the London Road. The station by this point had dropped the town suffix that it adorned whilst the railway was being constructed, despite there being an LSWR station with the same name. Keeping with the theme of confusion, there was a second station built at the docks for excursions, who would use ferries that would transport them across the Thames to Kew Gardens. Strangely, there's no official record of the station ever being used. One of the more infamous talking points surrounding the Brentford Branch Line is the involvement of one of the more prolific engineers of the time, who was none other than Isambard Kingdom Brunel himself. The Three Bridges Monument was constructed to allow for the Grand Junction Canal, the Great Western and Brentford Railway, and present-day Windmill Lane to pass over one another, and it was seen as his final hurrah in the engineering world. His erudite abilities as an engineer has helped him garner notoriety, and has led to Three Bridges receiving scheduled monument status. The Brentford Branch Line was built with broad gauge rather than standard gauge, with ballast placed beside the initial broad gauge track to allow for a doubling of the tracks to occur at some point in the future. It wasn't until 1861 that the railway did receive the second track, although it was standard gauge rather than the existing broad gauge one it paralleled. It was delegated to freight services to and from Brentford Dock, with the self-contained Brentford to Southall passenger service sticking with the broad gauge, but in 1875, the broad gauge track was converted to standard gauge. The GWR are about to face a competitor who would put the first nail in the railway's coffin, that being the introduction of the London United Tramways electric trams between Brentford and Southall. Sure, the Great Western Railway established a station at Trumpers Crossing Halt in 1904, but the electric trams in the London and South Western Railway operating direct services to central London from Brentford became difficult for the Great Western Railway to compete with. This was when the branch had the highest frequency operating on it too, where it went from 9 trains a day to a half-hourly service. Demand continued to plummet despite the GWR's best efforts, and passenger services ceased as an economic measure during World War I. Post-war services were reintroduced on Monday to Saturday, following local pressure with a Sunday service reinstated a few years later. The Trumpers Crossing Halt was shut in 1926, with the station's materials donated to South Greenford Station that was under construction at the time. The decline progressed into the late 1920s, with passenger services reduced to peak hours only on weekdays and a few on Saturday morning, before they ceased entirely on the 4th of May 1942, with GWR's Brentford Station closing the same day. What about freight though? The Golden Mile just off the Great West Road was seeing rapid development, prompting the construction and eventual opening of the Brentford Goods Yard in 1930, and by 1951 the goods yard was seeing 25 freight trains a day. This proved to be nothing more than a reprieve for the Brentford Branch Line though, as transporting goods by lorry became ever more convenient for businesses located within the Golden Mile by the 1960s. By this point, a portion of the line had been singled, with the former up line having the tracks lifted in 1956. It wasn't looking so good for the Brentford Branch Line by this point. Services between the dock and the goods yard were discontinued in 1964, with the tracks eventually lifted in 1965. Brentford Dock has been for the most part consumed by the Brentford Dock housing estate that sits atop the old station site, and the Brentford Branch Line sees little more than a few freight services a week to the waste transfer station and for the transfer of construction aggregates. So what plans were made to convert the Brentford Branch Line to a heritage railway? The Great Western Railway Preservation Group was a group committed to the restoration of steam and diesel locomotives, to establish a heritage centre in Southall, to promote railway preservation schemes and to operate excursions on branch lines across London, but more specifically on the Brentford Branch Line. The group was established in 1976 and established a base at Southall Railway Centre in West London, which they were based in for many years. Their goal was to operate heritage services along the underused Brentford Branch Line, which they did achieve. On the 28th of August 1983 and the 15th of July 1984, a diesel multiple unit ran a shuttle service between the goods yard at Brentford and Southall. It was unfortunate that this setup couldn't become a permanent fixture for the line, given how committed the GWR-PG were to operating steam specials along the branch. I suppose the question now arises, would the Brentford Branch Line be a sensible place for a heritage railway to operate? The line is seldom used, and it does raise the argument as to whether a heritage railway could make decent use of it. There have been calls to reopen the Brentford Branch Line in recent years, with a suggestion made in 2017 that passenger services could be reinstated from Southall to a station just off the A4 by the existing waste station. It stems from the ongoing redevelopment in the Golden Mile, where the redevelopment promises the construction of 1,580 new homes and has the potential to house 28,000 jobs. There have been other suggestions made to extend the branch into Brentford, where it would link up with South Western Railway and future West London orbital services. This would improve links from West to South West London, and would offer links from the Brentford Branch Line to destinations further afield, such as Old Oak Common and Hounslow. If the shuttle ever reaches Brentford, I reckon it could go some way to enabling longer distance journeys from West to South West London made by bus to instead be made by train, and would help relieve bus routes such as the 120 and 195. There have been suggestions made that the shuttle could operate as frequently as every 20 minutes, though I'm not so sure on how possible that would be without the reinstatement of the long-gone up line. All things considered, I'd argue it would be a sensible idea to use the Brentford Branch Line as a heritage railway if a reinstatement of passenger services doesn't go ahead. Well, I think that's enough about the Brentford Branch Line for now, so on to the second and final railway we go. So which railway will I turn our attention to next? We'll now look at the now closed portion of the Addiscombe Branch from Black Horse Lane to Addiscombe. So let's get into it. Let me take you back to 1861, when the South Eastern Railway promoted a bill which outlined ambitions to construct a branch from New Beckenham to a station within the vicinity of Croydon as a 3-platform Addiscombe Road to compete against the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. The South Eastern Railway wished for the railway to progress further on into Redhill, but the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway rejected the plans, so the line never went any further than Croydon-Addiscombe Road. The extension to Addiscombe Road opened in 1864, with an intermediate station established at Woodside and South Norwood in 1885, bringing about prosperity and residential development. In 1899, the South Eastern and Chatham Railway Joint Managing Committee was formed, with intentions to transform the station into a proper terminus, given there was very little chance they'd ever go further than Addiscombe Road. This reconstruction saw the relocation of the turntable used by locomotives and a proper courtyard established outside the front of the station. Despite the swanky revamp made to Addiscombe Road, it was so inconveniently placed for passengers wishing to travel towards Croydon, given it was a mile outside central Croydon and it was simply unable to compete with the conveniently placed London Brighton and South Coast Railway Station in East Croydon, which meant that for most of its existence, Addiscombe was looked at as rather underused. It did seem like things were going in the right direction for the Addiscombe branch, as the line did see electrification and the introduction of a half-hourly service to central London from 1925, but the electrification scheme was left to be picked up by the Southern Railway rather than the South Eastern and Chatham Railway, as they didn't have the funds necessary to electrify it. It was around this point that Croydon-Addiscombe Road was renamed to Croydon-Addiscombe. The half-hourly service didn't last for long, as World War II meant a reduction in the number of services along the Addiscombe branch, which the branch never really recovered from passenger numbers-wise. The branch then became a self-contained shuttle in October 1939. There were some peak-hour weekday services into central London that were brought back in 1948, but they were underused, so disappeared again in 1950. Not much changed in the following decades, other than the removal of Platform 3 at Addiscombe to make way for an electrified siding and the station dropping the Croydon prefix to just Addiscombe. It was in 1994 that saw the Croydon Tramlink Bill pass through Parliament, envisioning the conversion of underused heavy rail routes to be converted for light rail tram operation. These included the West Croydon to Wimbledon line, the Addiscombe branch, and bits of the nearby South Croydon and Woodside Joint Railway that closed in 1983. The writing was truly on the wall for the Addiscombe branch by this point, and the line fell into decline in the years up until its closure. An arson attack destroyed the Addiscombe signal box in 1996, which led to only one of the platforms at Addiscombe being used, and the upline had to be taken out of use. The Class 415s were retired in April 1995 after 40 years of service, which meant that the 4-road depot was no longer in use as the Class 465s and 466s were prohibited from entering it. Passenger services ceased entirely from the 31st of May 1997 to allow for construction of the Croydon Tramlink project to begin, with Elmer's End to Woodside seeing the tracks lifted in early 1998. So what were the plans put forward for Addiscombe? The Croydon Tramlink Bill passed in 1994 called for the conversion of Elmer's End to present-day Blackhorse Lane, from heavy rail to light rail so that trams could operate along it. This meant that there was a kilometre-long stretch of the alignment that laid in limbo between Blackhorse Lane and Addiscombe that wasn't going to be used as part of the project. The South Eastern and Chatham Railway Preservation Society in 1995 requested for Addiscombe Station, which wouldn't be incorporated into the Croydon Tramlink project, to be converted into a heritage museum which would have stored assets that the Preservation Society had accumulated. It was planned that the 4-road shed next to Addiscombe Station had been closed for a number of years following the retirement of the EPBs could be brought back into use to store rolling stock that the Preservation Society were hoping to deploy on a functioning heritage railway. According to a New Shopper article published in 2001, there were also ideas to reopen the trackbed that laid in limbo between Blackhorse Lane and Addiscombe, to be used as part of a heritage railway. Unfortunately, the plans fell by the wayside when Croydon Council and Railtrack failed to support the scheme. What was remaining of the alignment now forms part of the Addiscombe Railway Park, which opened in 2007 and is now used by dog walkers, runners, and those wanting to go for a walk. The Addiscombe station site was engulfed by the East India Way development from 2001, but there is still some of the station's wall that remains as you walk down East India Way. So do I think Addiscombe to Blackhorse Lane would have been a good place to house a heritage railway? I'd say so. I think it would have been the South London equivalent of North Woolwich, which also had a heritage museum and had plans for a heritage railway from North Woolwich to Custom House, which you can hear more about in my first video. The advantage of establishing one in Addiscombe is there are so many alternative methods of transport in the area surrounding the old Addiscombe station that passenger services aren't likely all that missed. You've got the 289 which offers links towards Elmer's End from Lower Addiscombe Road, the trams from the nearby Addiscombe tram stop, and the 312 and 367 that offer links towards East Croydon. There might have been concerns raised as to how you could fit a tram heritage railway interchange in at Blackhorse Lane, as there isn't a great deal of space admittedly, but given the 4-road shed that was next to Addiscombe, the station having 2 platforms and there being a kilometre of unused railway alignment with adequate alternative public transport links, I think it would have been a really nice idea, and a shame that it wasn't followed through on. Well, that's it from me, folks. We covered 2 more heritage railways that were never meant to be, and I hope you all really enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video, as it massively helps me out when you do. What do you think of these 2 railways? Do you think they would have made good heritage railways? Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. I really enjoy reading and responding to what you all have to say. As I mentioned in the last video, if I have missed out on any heritage railways that were meant to be established in London but never went through in the end, then do leave a comment down below, and who knows, maybe we'll have a 3rd part. Anyway, that's it from me. Take care, folks. See you in the next video.